Hello everyone, I'm going to be making Samantha Seneviratne's banana bread scones with chocolate chips and pecans. So first I'm preparing the wet ingredients. I'm starting with one medium banana. Her recipe calls for a large banana, but this is what I have. And this is a great way to use up any bananas that you have that might be overripe. I really don't like bananas whenever they're overripe, so it's a great way to use them that's not just straight up banana bread because I've made that too many times and I was ready for a different recipe that still used up some ingredients that I needed to use in the kitchen. So I'm mashing it up with a fork just until it's really smooth and there's no big chunks. And then I'm going to add in a beaten egg and some heavy cream and some vanilla bean paste. And I'm just going to whisk that together until it's homogeneous. And set that aside while we cube the butter and then prepare the dry ingredients. So we're just taking half a cup of butter, which is one stick, and you want to make sure that your butter is really, really cold because in recipes like this, scones or biscuits or anything like that, you want to make sure the butter's cold so whenever your pastry bakes, it'll be really flaky. If the butter melts, the texture will be totally off. So you want to work quickly here and cube the butter into small pieces. And then we're going to take some all-purpose flour and brown sugar and kosher salt and baking powder and just whisk those together until most of the clumps are gone, but brown sugar is really clumpy, so you'll still have some big clumps of it, but don't worry, it'll taste good no matter what. And then we're gonna cut the butter into the flour, and I'm gonna use a pastry blender, but you could use forks or just your hands or knives or whatever. I really like using my pastry blender. I think it gets the pieces of the butter really small, and it also keeps it really cold. So I'm just cutting it in until they're about the size of peas, and it'll have a really sandy texture, but it's okay if some of your pieces of butter are still bigger than others. You want to work quickly in this step so that the butter doesn't get too warm. And so now I'm just going with my hands and making sure there's no extremely big pieces of butter, and I'm kind of flattening out any of the larger pieces in there so that it gives the scones a flakier texture. And now I'm going to chop up the pecans and the chocolate chips. Her recipe uses toasted hazelnuts, and I don't have any hazelnuts, but pecans are a great substitute for that, and they are one of my favorite nuts, so they go really well in these banana bread scones. And her recipe also calls for chocolate chunks, but I don't have chocolate chunks, so I'm just taking my chocolate chips and kind of chopping them a little bit so they're not all the same size or the same shape, so that way it's a more interesting dispersion of the chocolate. And I'm just going to toss those in the dry ingredients so they get evenly dispersed. And then I'm creating a little well in the center of the dry ingredients to add in the wet ingredients. It'll be easier to incorporate if you put it in the well and then add it slowly as opposed to just dumping it in and trying to mix it. So I'm just going to add those in the center, and I'm only adding a portion because I wanted to see how wet the batter would be before I added all of it in. And I'm using a fork because I think it's a really great way to not overmix. You definitely don't want to overmix these because they'll have a really tough texture. and I'm just trying to get most of the dry ingredients incorporated, but I'm not going to worry about it being too homogeneous. And now I'm just going to go in with my spatula and make sure there's no dry ingredients at the bottom. And I'm just going to kind of fold it over itself. I don't really want to mix it too much because it'll incorporate the butter too much, but I just want to make sure that all the flour is incorporated. So now I'm just going to pat it into about a 7-inch circle, and I don't really want to knead it at all. I just want to form it into a flat disc. And scones can be a really wet dough, so I wanted to make sure that my surface was floured really well so they don't stick. And I'm taking a prepared baking sheet and I'm going to cut with my bench scraper. I believe she cuts hers into 8 scones, but I wanted them to be a little bit bigger, so I just cut mine into 6. I'm using my bench scraper to put them on the baking sheet. A bench scraper is one of the best tools in the kitchen. I use it all the time. I highly recommend using it. Kind of dusting off some of the excess flour. That is one of the main reasons I love my bench scraper, is because it's an easy way to clean up all the flour. Like, it's on your counter. That's one of the most annoying things whenever you're working with a floured surface, is trying to get the flour off the counter. But a bench scraper works so well for that. And next, we're going to brush these scones with a little bit of cream because it encourages browning. And then we're going to sprinkle them with some coarse sugar. I used turbinado sugar, but you could use demerara or any other sugar that has like really big granules. It gives the scones a nice crunchy top, and it also just makes them even more delicious. And now they're going in the oven. And here is the finished product. These scones were so delicious, and they were a great way to use up an extra banana that I had, and they were really great with tea, but they're a great morning pastry. You could have it with coffee or whatever you like in the morning, or just whenever. They are a great treat, and they're not overly sweet, but they are really amazing, and I hope you make them.